Rapture felt like a place where atom addicts were stalking you for their next fix. Bioshock Infinite feels like a game that puts enemies in your way because it's a video game, and that's what video games do. The handyman fights are a great example of this. They're Bioshock Infinite's equivalent of Big Daddies. It's even implied that they're based on Fink overhearing Shu Chong and Tenenbaum's research. In Bioshock, Big Daddies would roam the halls and warn you away if you got too close, but you had to actively transgress to start combat. These fights were, at least until the end of the game, major events that had you gather resources and plan for them. But when you were ready, you could attempt to slay one of these huge beasts, and when you killed him, he'd let out a tortured moan as his little sister would sob over the body. What happened to her then was up to you. Big Daddy fights had a sense of anticipation and player preparation leading up to them that climaxed in this combination of victory tinged with a bit of sadness. In Bioshock Infinite, handyman attacks are just scripted events that come whenever the designers think they'd look the coolest. A big guy in a metal suit shows up and wails on you like he's a stock mini-boss out of Double Dragon. There's no tension, just a war of attrition as you try to whittle his health down before moving on, indifferent to the whole affair. Just a war of attrition.
Appreciate it.
Just a war of attrition.
Who's to say you won't beat me to the punch?
just a war of attrition.
Last time, Campster did an abysmal job of explaining how the narrative and the characterization were at odds with the mechanics. Now, let's see how he fares discussing how the mechanics actually function. Spoiler alert, he's just as poor.
But while the emotional tone of the game may be lacking and the setting of Columbia may be flawed, it's the gameplay that ultimately tipped the scales against Bioshock Infinite for me. At this point, just about the entire soul of the game's legacy has been stripped away. You can play System Shock 2, Bioshock, and Bioshock 2, and chart how their Ultima Underworld influence is lessened as they've become more and more a stock shooter with every iteration. With Bioshock Infinite, that transformation is more or less complete. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, Human Revolution simplified or removed a lot of Deus Ex's mechanics, but it still felt true to the series, yet modern.
The same is true for Infinite, you just sucked at it.
But the mechanics they've settled on haven't transformed the game into a streamlined version of itself. Arguably, that's what the first Bioshock did when it modernized System Shock 2. Instead, they've taken a game franchise that has been traditionally about resource management and planning with an action twist and boiled it completely down to a stock shooter.
And here, Campster, like so many others, dismisses Infinite as a generic shooter. Worse, a terrible generic shooter. However, he gives no proper references to prove this. At best, he provides multiple shooters as examples to discuss the health system, but nothing beyond that. He references Dishonored a couple times, but that's a stealth game. Speaking as someone who just played the most recent Call of Duty at the time of Infinite's release, I have to ask, how is this game more appealing?
What little inventory management Bioshock had left is gone. Crafting is gone. Hacking is gone. Security systems are functionally gone and replaced with boring turrets and guns that attack on sight.
I'm going to skip over the inventory for now. Campster has a theory as to why they removed it, and I'll address how this decision influenced Infinite's design when we get there. As for the others, crafting was already removed in Bioshock 2, and all it was in Bioshock 1 was a different form of currency. Don't get me wrong, it was definitely addictive, but it has no place here. Likewise, hacking was simplified in Bioshock 2. I remember the pipe dream minigame, and I had a lot of fun with it. And I remember when they changed it to this. And most importantly, I remember how everyone cheered it on as an improvement. So when Irrational removes it altogether, audiences shouldn't complain. They brought this on themselves. And the turrets function the same as turrets and security bots in the original game. There's a brief pause before they attack you, made longer if you have the right gear equipped. The only difference is that there isn't a timed alarm horn.
Bioshock had 3 independent systems you could play against each other, like having a turret hit a Big Daddy to make him fight it, or throwing Enrage at a Big Daddy to kill splicers. None of that is here. The photography research minigame is completely absent.
First off, everything you just described is a variation of possession. Second, you still have the ability to play the Vox Populi and the Founders off of each other. Admittedly, that doesn't happen terribly often, but there are instances in the game in which you can trigger an unexpected fight between them and use it to your advantage. Third, while you can't interact with the world in the same way as with Rapture, there are still many elements to utilize at all times, from the skylines to the tears to the gear. All of them can be used in creative and atypical ways, such as combining the Burning Halo gear, which makes Skyhook attacks cast fire, with an oil leak tear and a well-aimed skyline strike, allowing you to create a bonfire to consume nearby foes, all without having to spend any MP. Lastly, the photography is just another upgrade system. The more photos you take of enemies, the more damage you deal, and that was in addition to the plasmid and tonic system, as well as the gun upgrades. This presented a serious problem that you yourself acknowledged when discussing the Big Daddies earlier. The game gets progressively easier, and this is due to the upgrade system. They did what they could to counter this with the incorporation of elite versions of ordinary enemy types, but even they fell thanks to the research system. elite big daddies included. The removal of this allows for infinite enemy types to maintain a level of strength late into the game. Don't get me wrong, you still find enemies going down more easily late game, so long as you're using the mechanics at least, but the problem was significantly toned down.
Combat research and hacking tonics have been replaced with a nonsensical clothing system where, depending on what kind of hat or vest you wear, your skyhook can set people on fire or give you health from kills.
Before I dig into the gear in general, I want to respond to those specific comments. The Burning Halo gear does offer you firepower in exchange for using melee, but there's more to it than that. To start with, it serves to counterbalance your limited resources, giving you a means by which you can cast Devil's Kiss without spending MP. Second, all melee focused gear can be used in creative ways, namely the Skyline Strike and Charge, so this serves as a boost to those as well. I already provided one example for how this can be used. As for the health boost, well, what else is there? The health boost is to serve as an alternative to the medkit system of previous games. In the past, you could apply a medkit whenever you wanted, but you had a limited amount. Here, you can boost your health as much as you want, so long as you meet the activation conditions. What better activation condition is there? I mean, they could have created gear that gave you extra health whenever you jump to the skylines, but that would have been broken. Now, this leads to the core function of the gear to motivate the players to try new things. The main focus of Infinite's combat is to encourage the players to keep changing tactics. The gear adds to this in two ways. First off, most of the gear offer perks that can only be activated under certain circumstances. For instance, Skyline Reloader. In Bioshock 2, they made the reload function so quick that there was no reason for it to exist. You might as well have made it one large clip like in Doom. Here, weapons take time to reload again, which can put you in a tight corner depending on how slow it is. With Skyline Reloader, you can bypass that by simply jumping to and from a skyline. Thus, a player who didn't utilize the skyline very much will become inclined to do so based on the offers of this gear. Another example is Vampire's Embrace, which we alluded to above. This gear grants you health boosts for all kills with the skyhook. As with Burning Halo, Vampire's Embrace doesn't just give you health for killing with melee, it gives you health for any kill involving the skyhook, including Skyline Strikes. I didn't use the Skyline Strike move too much on my first playthrough. I just kept forgetting about it, despite how useful it is. It's a guaranteed one-hit kill for most enemies, but I just kept dismissing it. When I learned that Vampire's Embrace could be amplified by this move, I started using Silent Strikes more and more often just for the health bonus. Now I can't imagine not using Silent Strikes, even when I don't have Vampire's Embrace. The other instance in which gear motivates new tactics is through randomization. With the exception of 5 gear, all of the gear in the game is random, and you have no way of knowing which gear will appear. You can even experience playthroughs where your favorite gear doesn't show up. In this scenario, you have to be flexible and willing to change tactics if you want to survive. Lastly, the gear are products of Fink Manufacturing. They have the logo printed on them. While we don't get any audio diaries explaining them, it's a reasonable inference that they, like everything else Fink created, were based off of machines stolen from another dimension.
You no longer have multiple ammunition types for each weapon.
Ammo types have no function in Infinite's design. Let's unpack how ammo types worked in the previous games, namely Bioshock. In Bioshock, most of the ammo types were some variation of more damage or element. The pistol had bullets that did more damage to splicers and bullets that did more damage to robots. The machine gun had the same thing. The shotgun had fire rounds and electricity rounds, which were basically plasmids. The grenade launcher had mines and rockets. The chemical thrower had fire, electricity, and ice, like the plasmids. The crossbow had more damage and trap bolts. Of those, the only unique ones were the trap bolts, the rockets, and the mines. Everything else was either an alternative version of plasmid or a bullet that kills a specific type of enemy type more easily. That was okay because the original Bioshock was heavily about resource management. You can use an armor piercing bullet against that security bot over there, but you won't have it when dealing with the Big Daddy later on. Those were the things you had to think about. However, Infinite isn't a resource management game. It has no inventory. It's about improvising, thinking on your feet, figuring out what to do with what's in front of you. A bullet whose only value is that it does more damage to one type of enemy offers no strategic value in this scenario. In short, the ammo types had no reason to be here.
Weapon upgrades are still here, but they've made the entire system broken and pointless by doubling the weapon count and then letting you only pick up at most 2 weapons at a time. This means you might spend $1,000 upgrading a pistol that you might drop when you realize 2 other weapons are situationally more advantageous right now, but the only way you can get that upgraded pistol back is to find another one laying about in the world levels later.
To start with, I will concede this to Campster. The inclusion of an upgrade system with a 2-weapon limit was a poor decision. The purpose of a 2-weapon limit is to put players into a corner and motivate them to take risks. Latching an upgrade system onto it had the opposite effect. My best guess as to why they did that was to bolster the respawn mechanic. The more you respawn, the less upgrades you get. It's a nice system in theory, but poor in execution. It's quite ironic that, for all its claims of wanting to be different, Infinite's Achilles heel would be a mechanic that the creator simply refused to let go of. This was not my experience, though. On my first playthrough, I understood exactly what this mechanic was for, and made a point to upgrade my guns evenly, so that I could swap them out often. And that has been my approach to every playthrough since then. That being said, I do recognize that this hampered the experience for many a player. However, this flaw aside, the game was never designed with the intent that you keep using the same 2 guns throughout. If it were, the Lutesis would have handed you a full stack of guns in the restaurant at the start, telling you that you need to choose wisely. It's what Irrational did with System Shock 2's class system. Infinite, by contrast, is always throwing new weapons at you, between the tears, the enemies, or new guns laying on platforms, begging you to pick them up. Let's take another look at the diecast special.
Although particularly towards the end of the game, there's plenty of corpses of the other side of whoever now controls the area that you're in, so you can usually find ammo for a bunch of different weapons. Problem I found was that there were just so many damn weapon variants that I could never find the ammo for the gun that I was actually using.
Well, but that feeds into why are you limited to 2 guns? Like, why did they change this? I understand because they wanted a Vox weapon and a regular police people weapon to be common for everyone so that you couldn't really have 24 or 16 or whatever the total weapon count would be in a radial interface. But the solution shouldn't be, okay, then we're going to go do the Halo system of 2 weapons max. That is a completely broken, antithetical, bad way to do this.
Hey, geniuses. That's the game's way of telling you to pick up a new weapon. Yes, I know that the upgrade system hampers it. I've seen countless streamers cling to the same 2 guns because of it. But you all are claiming to be game design analysts, and you are discussing the game after having played it, not during your playthrough. I'm expecting more out of you than from the average VTuber.
Exploration is all but dead. Bioshock had plenty of nooks and crannies and back alleys to rifle through. Infinite occasionally gives you a closet.
How would you know? No, seriously, how would you know whether Infinite has compelling secrets in its level or not? You yourself admit that you didn't search the levels, and much of your late game footage shows very few upgrades to the MP and shield bars, which tells me that you didn't search at all, otherwise you would have found gear and infusions.